It is a scene from nearly 6 decades ago, but it wouldn't leave us alone. We see an ordinary American citizen entering a prestigious university and thinking he will participate in a simple experiment on memory and learning. 45 minutes later, we see him coming out. He is now a torturer. This is a scene, of course, from the famous obedience to authority experiments Stanley Milgram conducted with over 700 participants at Yale University in the early 1960s. It wouldn't leave us alone because it appears to suggest something categorically unacceptable, monstrous, even, that many of us, perhaps you or I, have the capacity to do evil. But it wouldn't leave us alone either, because despite the fact that it saw the light in the controlled environment of the experimental lab, it is enigmatic. Quite simply, what happened in Milgram's lab doesn't seem to account for the sudden emergence of a torturer. The unwitting participants entering Yale face a very simple moral dilemma. The question whether they should continue electrocuting an innocent victim when his only fault is having made a mistake in a memory association test, when he grunts, protests, howls, stops all cooperation, screams, and then suddenly falls completely silent. Well, this is not so much a question as a no-brainer, really, especially when the unwitting participants themselves express reluctance to continue. But then they do. And this is where the no-brainer turns into a riddle. The participants continue on the simple say-so of the experimenter. And 60 years after the fact, we are just as puzzled as Milgram was witnessing his first pilots. What exactly does this calm experimenter do that leads to the participants' fateful decision to continue? Now, some of you may know, some maybe don't. Audio recordings of these original experiments, the original experimental sessions, are available at a dedicated archive at Yale University. So we can actually listen to the experimenter interacting with the participants. What I would like to show you in the remainder of this talk are some broad brush characteristics of the experimenter's behavior. This is based on an ongoing study of 140 experimental sessions across 4 conditions. And I hope it will convince you of the possibility of an unexpected and far-reaching solution to the riddle. So what happened in Milgram's lab? When the participants expressed their misgivings, the experimenter predominantly responded with a succession of 4 utterances. He called them prods. First, he simply says, "Please continue," and its variant. Then, if the participant continues objecting, the experiment requires that you continue. Then, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, you have no other choice. You must go on. Now, we can ask a very simple question. Which of these prods is followed by an obedient reaction from the participants? Is it, perhaps, in line with the stern image Milgram depicts of his experimenter, the uncompromising prod 3 and the order-like prod 4? Or is it in line with the currently more popular explanation prod 2, with its manifest appeal to science? Or is it, to draw on other contemporary explanations, that these prods were flexibly combined into convincing arguments? Or that actually none of these prods were required at all? There are, of course, many ways to explore these questions. As a first step, let us just look at the sheer frequency with which they were used. What you can see here is that in these experiments, the little phrase, "please continue," completely, utterly eclipses everything else. It is used as many times as every other prod put together, including extra prods the experimenter used. Despite being virtually forgotten by all accounts to make sense of the experiment, Please Continue may be the very star of the show. What is more, we don't just hear Please Continue and its variants left, right, and center. We often hear them attached to other prods. So the experimenter doesn't just say, the experiment requires that you continue, but often, the experiment requires that you continue. Please continue. Did that perhaps make any difference? In this table, you can look at the percentage chance of immediate obedience when a given prod is heard. Will the participant give the next shock? Blue columns represent obedience when the prod is used on its own. The orange ones where the prod is used with a Please Continue variant attached. What we see is, first of all, that prod 1 is towering above everything else. When heard on its own, this is the blue column, participants will almost definitely continue the experiment. Yet we can also see here the difference between hearing the other prods in the pure form and hearing them with Please Continue attached. And this difference is astonishing. Every single prod seems to have worked better, much, much better when used together with Please Continue and its variants. These are simple descriptive findings, nothing conclusive, but they do indicate the intriguing possibility that for 60 years we may have been looking in the wrong direction. Maybe the key to the obedience experiments generating the monster is not the experimenter's more obvious interventions, attempting to persuade, or order, or even coerce. Maybe the key is what appears to be a small, insignificant polite phrase. Please continue. Well, if that was true, it wouldn't just be unexpected, but utterly baffling. How could it possibly be that it's a little polite phrase, please continue, making all the difference, leading to the participants' violent obedience? To tap into this issue, let us look at this tiniest of phrases in the tiniest of exchanges. Well, a tiny exchange, I say, but it is also one that occurs on over 70% of the occasions when the participants initiate a discussion with the experimenter. Here we are at 90 volts, and for the second time, the participant will hear the learner grunt.
That is incorrect. He held it, I'm not. He's yelling out there. The correct answer was cool cave. Next. Go.
What ensues here looks like a very simple exchange. A short statement from the teacher, polite nudge from the experimenter, peppered with some silence, and on we go on the road of torture. But let us examine this extract a bit closer. Notice that although the participant's statement at face value asserts a simple fact, behind this there is also an unsaid yet very clear communication of concern. That the learner's yelling or hollering may be of relevance here. And also, notice what the apparently polite continue please does to this concern. It certainly doesn't reassure, but it doesn't attempt to persuade either. It just bluntly and completely ignores, as though the participant's concern had never even existed. But if it ignores the participant's concern, what does then the experimenter's request, continue please, actually engage with? Well, it is directed precisely at the source of the participants ignored concern, at the gesture of stopping, listening to the learner's protest, thinking, and then making this protest relevant, caring about him. In other words, the gesture by which the participant attempts to become a human agent instead of being just an inhuman cog in the experimental machine. This gesture, this minimal attempt at becoming human, is what Continue Please seeks to expose and root out. To briefly conclude then, I would like to suggest that what led to destructive obedience in the Milgram experiments were violent acts. Only, and this is absolutely crucial, this was a kind of violence which couldn't be recognized. It was in the smallest of utterances, perhaps in the smallest of silences, stamping down on the smallest of attempts by which the participants try to become truly human. Ordinary American citizens may have become torturers because of the relentless yet invisible assault on the sense of agency and self. They couldn't stop doing evil because they couldn't recognize that evil was being done to them.